would be great. Perfect.
Okay.
All right. I'll be on mute and admit everyone right now.
Yep. Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, perhaps good evening. Let's more people in. Hello, my name is Philip Bubb, and I am a Senior Program Officer at UNEP World Conservation Monitoring Centre, and I'm going to be facilitating today's webinar. One of my roles at the UNEP World Conservation Monitoring Centre is to lead the technical support for developing monitoring action plan as part of the GEF-EAS Action Support Project, which this webinar is a series of. It's a pleasure to be here today, and thank you very much for joining this webinar from wherever you are around the world. This webinar is part of the GEF-EAS Action Support Project, and it's the 6th in our series on capacity building, and it's about developing a monitoring action plan and identifying national data and monitoring system needs. And today, what we're going to do is, after we've done this introduction and some logistic information, we will introduce the monitoring framework of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Very happy to have Gillian Campbell with us from the Secretariat of the CBD to do that. Then I will be giving an introduction to some guidance material that we've been developing for this subject, offering some useful information and suggested steps for developing national monitoring system plans. Can I have the next slide, please? So just the technical issue to support. I know we're all experienced at Zoom now, but here are some brief reminders. We have our UNEP WCMC colleague Laura Mack, who's providing technical support for this meeting. Her details are there. So if you have any difficulties, please contact Laura. Your microphones will be muted to help ensure our speakers can be heard clearly, but we do encourage participation, and please do use the chat and ask your questions. You can put your questions in the Zoom chat box, or after we've done the presentations, we have plenty of time for questions and answers, and you can raise your hand then, and you can say your question and we'll do our best to answer it. Sorry, could you just go back one slide, Laura? Thank you. So just also, we have a webinar page with the link here, where you can access today's presentations and recordings when they've finished, and we'll also share these the recordings by email after the series concludes. You can also access past webinar sessions on the NBSTAP forum webinar page, and we'll put the links for those in the chat. Next slide, please, Laura. So here's our agenda, as I said. So in a moment, I'm going to ask Gillian Campbell to give us an introduction to the monitoring framework of the Global Biodiversity Framework. Then I'll be introducing the guidance materials that we've been developing on information and suggested steps for developing a national monitoring system plan. And then we have the questions and answers. Next slide. I think then we can go now to the first presentation by Gillian.
Hey, I sent a video. I don't know if somebody's going to play it or if you wanted me to.
I think Laura's
Apologies, it's just loading.
Okay, just making sure you weren't waiting for me. Good morning or afternoon. This is our 6th webinar in the series of webinars under the Early Action Support Project. In previous webinars, I've talked about the progress leading up to the adoption of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. The roadmap that the framework provides towards the vision of living in harmony with nature by 2050, the 4 goals which define this vision, and the 23 targets which set a path towards improved biodiversity outcomes by 2030. The previous webinars have included presentations on the monitoring framework, the template for the submission of national targets, and the process for developing national reporting. Today, I've decided not to use slides and to just provide a summary of where the work on the monitoring framework stands, and the other presentations in this session will go into more detail. In previous webinars, we have discussed that the framework also includes a monitoring framework, which was adopted in Decision 15.5. It includes a set of indicators for tracking progress towards the goals and targets at the national and global level. The indicators include monitoring of actions and policies, the drivers of biodiversity loss, the state of biodiversity and ecosystem services, and biodiversity finance. The monitoring framework includes headlined indicators, which are recommended for use by all countries in their national biodiversity strategies and action plans, and which are included in the national reporting template. It includes binary indicators, which will be further developed and included in the national reporting template, and component and complementary indicators, which countries are encouraged to use, as well as a reference to the use of national indicators. The headline and binary indicators provide a set of indicators which are suggested for use by all countries, and which can be aggregated to provide a global picture of progress towards the global biodiversity framework. It also provides the flexibility to allow countries to measure what matters to them by selecting from component, complementary, and national indicators. Note that the binary indicators represent a set of yes or no questions related to implementation actions. These are not quantitative indicators at the national level. In these webinars, we have discussed the adoption of enhanced mechanism for planning, monitoring, review, and reporting in Decision 15.6. It includes a timeline for developing national biodiversity strategies and action plans by next year, the timeline for the national reporting submission, and for global review. This decision also includes indicators which are to be included in the national reporting template, which are the headline indicators and the binary indicators. This is to be included in the national reports of all countries. Specifically, the decision notes that headline and binary indicators will be included in the template and that the component and complementary indicators, as well as national indicators, are recommended for inclusion. This decision also demonstrates the structure of the national reporting template. It suggests that for headline indicators, countries have 3 options for reporting. Option 1 is to use and submit national data for the indicator. For this, the Secretariat is developing an Excel style of submission template, which would allow countries to share indicator data. Option 2 is to use globally available data. For this, the Secretariat is working with UNEP WCMC to ensure that APIs which connect to the relevant global data sets are available. Option 3 is to not use a national dataset or a global dataset and to provide an explanation as to why. For example, perhaps the global dataset lacks national contextualization and capacity is needed to develop the national dataset. According to the Global Biodiversity Framework, the mechanism for planning, monitoring, review, and reporting, and the monitoring framework, this completes a system of enhanced transparency and responsibility. Adopting these was a major achievement. However, in order for the framework to be a success, it must be implemented by countries. Each nation will need to take ambitious and urgent action towards the agreed targets and to effectively set national targets and monitor progress using the indicators. This cannot happen without improved national data and information. If the national reports were to be due today, no country would be able to fully report on the headline indicators. Many of the indicators do not have methodologies which are ready for use at the national level, and the list of binary indicators is still being discussed. An ad hoc technical expert group has been established and is working to fill these gaps. The work on the methodologies for the headline indicators is ongoing and expected to finish by COP16 next year. Additionally, the subsidiary body on scientific, technical, and technological advice will need to consider the outcomes of this work. The subsidiary body has already begun its consideration of the binary indicators last month in Nairobi, but the final list of questions has not yet been agreed. Even once the methodologies for the headline indicators are finalized, there will still be a need for capacity building on all the indicators of the framework. This is why an assessment of monitoring needs at this point in the early action support project is so important. And while remote sensing and global models can provide information that we didn't have in the past, it must be coupled with biodiversity observation on the ground. There have been huge advancements in biodiversity monitoring and biodiversity science, but these advancements have not happened equally across the globe, and many of the biodiversity-rich regions are also data poor. This is the time to assess these data gaps and to plan for them and to have better data in the future. However, even with better data, we need to ensure that it can be absorbed into national policymaking. There's a need for improved dialogue and exchange between the research community and biodiversity decision makers. The idea behind the monitoring framework is that it will not just be used to show where the world stands, but to inform decisions at the national level, to identify what is working and what is not working, and to be able to course correct. Thus, there is both an opportunity and a challenge in terms of implementing the monitoring framework. I look forward to the rest of the discussion today. And as mentioned, we are just starting on the path to improving how we monitor biodiversity and how we use this information to guide decision making and review. Thank you, and I appreciate being invited to this webinar.
Very much, Julianne. Thank you for that. Really informative about the monitoring framework and its development and its aims, and really glad to have you with us for this webinar, and to be able to help answer questions in a little bit. If you have questions now, you want to put them in the chat, that's okay, or wait until after my next presentation. So I'm now going to share present on some information and suggested steps to support the development of a national monitoring system plan. As part of component 2 of the early action support project, countries are requested to develop a plan for having a monitoring system, which would include the indicators and use of the monitoring framework that we've just been hearing about. This presentation is structured around some sections of a draft guidance document which UNEP WCMC has been developing, which I will introduce next. UNEP Environment World Conservation Monitoring Centre, UNEP WCMC, has a role to provide technical support with UNEP and UNDP and the CBD Secretariat to the GEF Early Action Support Project. And as part of that, we've been developing some guidance materials to assist planning the development of national monitoring systems as part of NBSAP revision and alignment with the Global Biodiversity Framework. I'm going to introduce some sections on some of the content of this draft guidance to support work for this component 2. And some of the material in this, the suggested steps, has been presented earlier at UNEP regional workshops for the Early Action Support Project and improved from feedback from that. And the guidance document will shortly be available on the NBSAP forum and at a web link made available at the end of this webinar. Feedback and suggestions on this are really welcomed. So these are the sections of the guidance, just a little bit on the relevant CBD COP decisions, as Gillian's been introducing, and introduction to the monitoring framework, and the stages for its development. And then some useful information for developing a monitoring system plan, and suggested steps for that, for doing those steps. And then also something called an indicator specification template is something that we're offering, and some useful resources. Briefly, as Gillian introduced, the development of indicators and monitoring plans is in response to the decisions of on the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and there are two in particular relevant for this. Okay, my slides will speak of you now.
Bill, I fixed it when I took over remote control. Okay. It's fine now. Thank you.
Thanks, Mel. Sorry. Sorry. Decision 15.6, mechanism for planning, monitoring, reporting and review. So for planning, it urges all parties to use the headline indicators and the other indicators in the monitoring framework according to national circumstances. And then decision 15.6 also, paragraph 13 is about reporting. So as Gillian was explaining, requests all parties to use the headline indicators and binary yes/no questions in their national reports, supplemented by the component and complementary indicators and other national indicators. But it also recognises that there is flexibility in this, considering perhaps that not all of the headline indicators may yet be available, and the needs for capacity building and recognition of national circumstances. So we have a section in the guidance which introduces the monitoring framework of the Global Biodiversity Framework. It's adapted from Annex 1 of Decision 15.5, which explains the composition of the monitoring framework, and was what's already been introduced in this webinar by Gillian. And it introduces also the work of the ad hoc technical expert group on indicators for refining indicators and making information available. As the work of this ad hoc technical expert group is ongoing, and developing the information on indicators, we haven't yet put specific information on each indicator in the guide, hopefully pending future availability of this information. And then we have a section in the guide which just has some considerations for development of indicators for national biodiversity strategies and action plans. Just based on the experience of UNEP WCMC, and so considerations that obviously indicators are for measuring progress towards targets. So you need to have the targets defined first. That the complex targets may need more than one indicator. Many of the targets in the Global Biodiversity Framework have different components and may need more than one indicator for them, and similarly for your national targets. You need data to track progress, and that needs to be produced consistently over time to be able to do that. So you need systems for producing that data, and also that indicators need some responsible agency and funding to be able to be produced consistently over time. And that requires, therefore, long-term investment in data production systems. Something also important to consider is that to allow measurement of progress towards goals and targets, an indicator needs to have a baseline measurement, a reference period. And so the COP decision 15.5 decides to use the period from 2011 to 2020, where data is available as the reference period, and for reporting and monitoring progress in the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. But it does allow for cases where there might be different baseline periods because of the lack of available information, or it may be some cases more appropriate for a particular indicator. And in this guidance, which is a draft, that we welcome feedback on it, we offer a suggestion for a definition of a national monitoring system as a nationally mandated system for the production of data, indicators, and reports to periodically measure and monitor national progress in the implementation of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And so this system might be led by a government body, or it could be another mandated organisation, perhaps in some countries, some cases by a university or other organisation. And scope and organisation of a national monitoring system will be determined by each party to the CBD according to what's most appropriate for its needs and circumstances. And so one of the considerations is obviously what is the scope or a sort of level of ambition of having a monitoring system. We suggest that there could be sort of perhaps 3 levels to think about for this, and according to your circumstances and resource needs and so on. But A could be a sort of a first level could be to calculate indicators to measure progress towards national actions and targets as needed for your CBD national reports, which are due in 2026 and 2029, and using data that you have available at those times. Or B could be to create or strengthen a coordinated monitoring system to produce indicators that are supporting NBSAP implementation and reporting. So more of an ongoing system. Or C could be to further create or strengthen a national information system that is providing more than indicators, but assessments and reports and the whole data system to support planning and implementation for all your biodiversity relevant international agreements and policy and management. I want to mention here that WCMC have been developing a framework called an information system framework, I'm not going to explain it here, but there is more information coming shortly with guidance available at this website. And this framework and some tools for it help identify how the capacity you have for an indicator or a report is now, and perhaps some gaps in, if there are any gaps in the technical or institutional aspects of having that information. And we have some suggested content of what a national monitoring system action plan might be. So one way to organize it could be looking by each NBSAP target that you are maintaining or modifying as part of alignment with the Global Biodiversity Framework, and to list the indicators that you're going to use to measure that target, and to describe any needs for the development of additional indicators in your plan. Where possible, of course, these indicators will be headline and other indicators in the monitoring framework. And we also suggest that for each of the existing or proposed indicators for your NBSAP, that you produce a specification sheet and delivery plan, which I introduce a little later. And then we suggest your monitoring system action plan could have a section of an overall plan of actions to develop a national monitoring system, which includes designating or strengthening a lead agency for this, definition of the roles and resource requirements of all the actors involved in the monitoring system, who's going to be doing the technical work, who's going to be doing the reporting, and what resources they need. And then how to produce currently available indicators over the duration of your NBSAP, the actions for that, costings, funding, sources, addressing capacity and resource gaps, and then also actions to define and establish indicators for targets that may still be in development. The Global Biodiversity Framework, it includes some new subjects that weren't included in the previous strategic plan, and it may take a little time for national targets to be developed for them and all the components in the targets. And so the work of establishing indicators for them may still be something to be planned in development. So now I'm going to introduce a section in the guidance which where we're offering some suggested steps. These are not requirements. These are just suggestions that you can use or not and adapt as you see best. And they're to support the Early Action Support Project document component 2, which has 2 subcomponents or outputs. 2.1 gaps in existing monitoring systems identified, and 2.2 monitoring action plan is developed. And the suggested steps integrate these outputs into a single project form. So they're not actually like 2.1 and then 2.2, but by following these steps, you will have covered these outputs. And steps are grouped into 4 stages. Number 1, preparation of a project to produce a monitoring system plan. And then 2, to actually do indicator definition for each NBSAP goal or target or action. Then 3, produce a delivery plan for each nationally selected indicator. And 4, bring it all together to develop a national monitoring system plan. So in the first suggested step is to organize as a project the production of an action plan I sort of like as a sub-component or sub-project within the overall early action support project. You could create a timetable and consider it as a mini project for strengthening your monitoring system. So that could involve defining a project coordinator, a project team, forming that team, perhaps forming a monitoring indicator stakeholder group or advisory panel, which could be part of wider work that you're doing for stakeholder involvement for revision of your NBSAP, and then to come up with an action plan and timetable for carrying out production of a plan. This is likely to be linked with the work on target setting and revision under component 1 of the early action support. And some countries may be contracting consultants to help with that work. And step to understand the purpose and content of the monitoring framework, of the global biodiversity framework, which we've just been hearing about. Obviously, it's necessary to the team to understand its purpose and what's inside the monitoring framework, so that you can consider and include its indicators. And then define the scope and success criteria of the national monitoring system. And as I said, I'd be sort of about what level of sort of ambition and resources are you expecting to consider for this? And it may be that you're monitoring across all the different NBSAP targets, that for some targets that are well established already in the past, such as on protected areas, there may be already established systems. And for newer subjects in your country, it may have a different level of ambition and capacity. So there may be sort of subsystems or targets to consider. And then there's a step to identify your current information capacity. So obviously you want to build on existing information systems and indicators for your NBSAP and for relevant subjects, including working with your national statistics offices and other government ministries or sectors for relevant subjects, which may well already have information and systems that can be used for this purpose. So you want to identify your current capacity, do this for just a high level sort of quick survey of relevant information that's available now that could be used for reporting and indicators. And you could organize this perhaps by NBSAP target. And would suggest move to looking at indicator definition for each NBSAP target that's being revised or maintained, or if that target hasn't yet been defined, at least perhaps you may have identified a subject area under the global biodiversity framework which you will want to develop a target, and you can start to look at information indicators for that. And so on that basis, it might be easier to start with targets which there is already established expertise within government, such as protected areas in many cases, and then look to other topics. So for each target, identify if there are any currently available national indicators for this target using information you collected in the previous step. And then indicators can be assessed in relation to how well they measure the target, and in relation to bringing in indicators for the monitoring framework. Is then obviously the next step to include headline indicators of the monitoring framework, if at all possible. It may not be possible in all cases if the headline indicator isn't yet available, or there may be capacity questions and so on, but if possible, that's what should be done. And then similarly, look to the relevant component and complementary indicators in the monitoring framework, to include them if necessary and practical. And then plan to develop new indicators if necessary. If there are gaps in what you need for your reporting and measurement. You may need to plan to develop new indicators. So that planning, that need goes into your monitoring action plan, that we need to develop those new indicators. And then perhaps the results for these steps could be summarized in a table such as this. So for each target, the indicators to be used, the development status of those indicators, such as are they ready now, or they need more data, and who's responsible for that indicator, the lead agency, the dates that would be planned for its calculation and reporting, and an assessment of how suitable for measuring the target this indicator is. Then we suggest bringing the indicators for each target together into indicator specification sheet. So I'll show this sheet in a little bit, but this specification sheet lists the different elements of what's needed to have an indicator, and the arrangements for it to be produced. And then this document is like a Word document that supports the consistent production indicator over time. You have the information available there in one place as to what's needed for it, and it helps clarify the roles and requirements of data providers and people who are managing the data and analyzing it, and it helps guide the communication of the indicator, and it can be a way to support transparency of all stakeholders in methods and data sources. And then identify any capacity development needs you have, like for having that indicator, and the specification sheet helps identify any gaps and needs like that. And then the indicator delivery plan. Define actually the steps to do that. And then bring that all together to develop your National Monitoring System Action Plan. Compile the indicator delivery plans, and identify the institutional leadership for the overall plan. And lastly, consult and finalize the plan with the indicator users and data providers and funders, because a successful plan will require both government commitment and authority for its implementation, and the support and contributions of the indicator and data providers, and the wider stakeholders involved in this. So it's important to consult and finalize the plan with them and funders. And just a couple more slides now. In the guidance document, we have a template which is more elaborated than this, but this is for an indicator specification template. So we suggest to produce something like this for each indicator based on the experience of WCMC, to help you be successful, where you identify this information, obviously the indicator name, the target or action it's measuring, how the indicator relates to the target, who's responsible for it, the development status of the indicator, is it ready now or still in development, how you define the indicator and the method produced for calculating it, how often producing it, where the indicator is used in reporting, and where the data comes from, costs and funding sources for the indicator, and capacity development needs. And then in the guidance, we have a section on relevant information resources, useful guidance materials, organizations that can support indicators and monitoring and data and tools such as UN Biodiversity Lab, and others that can assist in this work. And so those are the sections of the guidance. At the end of the webinar, I will put up a link. I'll put it in the chat as well, where you can download the guidance with a feedback form, which we would really welcome your input, and then we will produce an improved version of the guidance from that feedback. And you can contact the UNEP WCM team along with UNEP and UNDP Secretariat of the CBD to provide assistance in this work on developing monitoring system plans. And this is an email address for that. So then we can move to a session of questions and answers. Myself and Julian principally to do our best to answer your questions. I'm looking. Would anybody like to put a question in the chat or raise their hand virtually in Zoom about what we've been presenting on the monitoring framework and guidance and steps? Okay. Yes. On this, yeah.
Yeah, good morning.
Hello.
My name is Olesya, and I'm working for resource supporting team of the Ministry of Environment of Ukraine. And currently we are working on a new procedure on about biodiversity monitoring in Ukraine. And it's really good to participate in that webinar. I've seen some insights. But also maybe you can suggest more literature or actually good example of such monitoring, national monitoring frameworks to us to see and maybe discuss with someone about their experience and so on. It can help us, but also what I recognize is the biggest problem. It's capacity and money to organize biodiversity monitoring, because it's huge. It's not like some point somewhere like 10, 15. No, it's hundreds, thousands, and it's a lot of data, and also a big question how to not only collect the data, but also store and analyze. Maybe you can suggest about some good examples of soft to collect and analyze such data. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll answer him, and Julian, please come in as well if you'd like to add anything. Thank you, Alessia. So, examples of monitoring frameworks. I think there are many different countries and have different sort of levels of monitoring capacity, so I can't think of a sort of like a specific example which I could give you of a country that has a monitoring system that we could share with you directly. but it's something that we could look at in the guidance. I think one of the countries that I think it's in a different context to many, but actually South Africa has developed a very advanced system of monitoring and indicators and data production and reporting. And I think it's always interesting to learn from them and adapt what they have done. You're right to recognize that the needs of that monitoring actually is very costly if you want to do it comprehensively, because it's not just the technical work of producing indicators, but it's also producing the data that needs to go into that and investment in that. That's partly why in the suggested steps we include identifying costs that are needed and the actions, so that as you develop the action plan, part of the plan is actually looking to raise funds for its implementation as part of your NBSAP implementation. So as NBSAPs, revised NBSAP should include costing and resource mobilization, which is being supported. The guidance for doing that is being supported by the Early Action Support Project and with UNDP and Biofin. I think what we hope is that by having a monitoring system plan where you clearly identified your needs for indicators and data and the capacity and then the costing for this, it's easier then to look to justify funding that's needed, both perhaps from sources within the country, but also from external support. And so this work will raise the profile and clarity of having investment needed in monitoring systems. Gillian, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, thanks. I think that South Africa is a really good example. And if we're considering different countries that you could go to and follow their example, that would be one. But there's different kinds of monitoring systems. So you have the biodiversity observation networks and building sort of the raw biodiversity data on the ground. And if you're looking for advice on how to do this, GeoBON, the Group on Earth Observation Biodiversity Observation Network, has been developing a BON in a Box program, which I think is really useful. It has good advice on sort of how can you build up this on the ground data collection. And in the people who have taken this, the full way forward, I think that you could look at Colombia with Humboldt Institute is a really good example of where this has been successful. An example actually of where they're developing a system right now is Canada. And one of the things that Canada is doing is having a decentralized system so that there would be statewide system, provincial level systems that build up to the national level. I think this is another good example for countries that have a more decentralized system so that they could see an example where that works. And then in terms of sort of how do you have a broader monitoring system across different indicators, Germany's doing a lot of work right now that I think is really interesting, and SANBI is another example. Uganda, as a less developed country, has done a lot of work in terms of monitoring biodiversity and doing different ecosystem-based assessments. Really, there's a lot of good experiences in a lot of different places, but it sort of depends on what you're looking for. And we do have an idea in an additional project, which is also being run by UNEP WCMC with funding from Germany, to try to do some matchmaking and identify what the capacity needs are of different countries and what kind of capacity different countries have, so that we could share these experiences across different regions. Thanks.
Alicia, did you want to have?
If no one wants to ask question, I will.
Yeah, we have time, I think.
Yeah, are you planning a new webinar or something like that about that indicators mentioned in monitoring framework for global biodiversity framework? Because it's a lot of new indicators, like in how to develop that, or like methodologies, and like to be aware. It's I think it can be really useful because it's huge list of interesting indicators. Do you understand what I ask?
I think you're asking for more sort of something more specific on the indicators in the monitoring framework.
Yeah. Are you planning some new webinars on that, or maybe some guidelines about what is it, what is methodology behind of that? Because for now I'm searching through internet what actually means like some red list of ecosystem or something like that, and so on. So
yes, thank you, and I see in the chat that Fahmi Hakim has also asked a similar question. Shin, would you be able to say something to this?
Yeah, okay then. My name is Fahmi Hakim from Indonesia. Yes, actually, in Indonesia we also try to matchmaking between our indicator and NBSAP, and also with the headline indicators. And we are recognized that we have the personal indicators from WCMC, but when we try to take a look at more details regarding the metadata, I don't know, but I could difficult to find the methodology, especially for the data variable that needed in particular headline indicators. So that will be more helpful if there will be some FGD or something that can more deep dive into each nation, into each headline indicators, and also the metadata, the methodology, if there's any formula to create the headline indicators result, that will be great in my opinion. That's my first question actually. And I have also another question regarding these headline indicators for the COP, for the decision 15.5. Yes, we have the headline indicators from the CBD, and is there any kind of, I don't know how to say this, if I mean, does we have to use headline indicators per se, or just the same headline indicators, rather than use the national indicators, that we have these national indicators quite similar with the headline indicators? Should we use the headline indicators from national one, or we just put in our NBSAP indicators the headline indicators from the global? What do you think for that? Thank you.
Very much good question. Ian, could you help us answering those?
Pardon?
So I'm not sure I really understand the question in terms of having the headline indicators and putting them in at the global. I mean, I think if you're asking if you have national data, if you should report that, it is up to you, but I think that it is really useful for you to share your national data. It demonstrates what's behind the decision making that's being made at the national level, and it also, provides information on how you're monitoring at the national level in a way that ideally is using existing standards that would allow other people to understand what the measurement system behind the numbers are. And so I think it is really, really useful to share this sort of information in your national reports if possible. But I'm not 100% sure that was what you were asking.
Yeah. Maybe I'm not clear enough to say the example. Maybe for the example, In global target number 2, you have not mistake regarding the extent of natural ecosystem. It's most likely for the restoration aspect. In our national indicators, we also have similar aspect that that require the data variables is more relate with the extent of natural ecosystem. The indicator said about the restoration, the number of restoration in Indonesia. So it's kind of similar, like similar to we use kind of proxy to meet the headline indicators. That's one of the example for the headline indicators and also the national indicators. Maybe this is not clear enough for you, right?
I mean, I think in terms of that one, in terms of the restoration, the data has to be coming from the national system. I would say that in the first round of national reporting in particular, as I mentioned, I mean, the headline indicator methodologies are still being developed. They're not going to be fully operational in most countries. And so sharing the information that you have and also noting any troubles that you're having to actually, compile the headline indicators would be really useful. And then hopefully over time, because it is important, I think, to have some sort of statistical standards behind the measurement so that you can compare with your neighbors. And, it can be useful for developing regional strategies and aggregating up. And so I think that there will be a need to build capacity, but this is going to take time, and we need to recognize that it's likely not going to happen overnight.
Okay. What about my first question? Is there any opportunity to, FGD regarding the deep dive for headline indicators? Do you have any plan for that?
I mean, we have been providing a lot of training, but I would maybe hand back over to Philip. WCMC has a number of projects related to providing support on the monitoring framework, and we're providing guidance with them, but there's a number of opportunities. But maybe Philip, you want to add?
Thank you, Gina.
Yeah. So we, as well as the guidance materials that we're working on and ask for your feedback on, we will be developing more projects to be able to provide technical assistance to countries in developing their monitoring capacity, working with UNEP and UNDP and CBD Secretariat on that. We're just getting those established. But also, Julian, one of the earlier question from Alicia and I think from Pambi also was to help countries' parties understand the indicators in the monitoring framework more. They're looking for metadata on the indicators. Obviously the method and so on for each indicator. And they haven't always been able to find all that they need. Could you say something about how metadata will be made available on the indicators, or recognizing?
Sure. I mean, the metadata that is available on a website called post2020indicators.com, which we do need, or .org, I mean, and we do need to change the name of this website, but the metadata is currently available there, and we can share the link to that. However, as this was pointed out, some of the metadata is still being developed by the ATAG. And so it is not a complete set of information. And so if you look at it, but it's not going to be quite ready, we are aiming to have a more complete version of the metadata, which would be available by SAPSTA 26. And so unfortunately, that's going to be the time where you're going to have more information. And so if there's particular indicators that you've noticed that are lacking, unfortunately, that will remain the case, at least until that time.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Philip, I have a question.
Okay, Vincent? Yes,
Yeah,
please. Could you introduce yourself, please?
I'm Vincent Lomen. I lead the team of the EAS project in the Philippines. And my question is for targets with targets for restoration. I am thinking, how do we supposed to measure the baseline? Because necessarily when you want to restore something, you have to restore it to its original state. And so it's so difficult to restore degraded areas and restore it to its original state. So what baseline do we need to use here so that we can tell after our conservation efforts that when can we tell that this area has been truly restored?
So if I can answer this, I mean, in terms of how you monitor your national level progress, choosing the baseline is a decision that is completely up to you. It's your decision from what point you want to track progress. In terms of the Global Biodiversity Framework, we're using 2020 as a baseline because we're trying to track progress towards the framework. However, for the case of restoration, it is an interesting case because we're not saying that any land that exists now is natural, and then moving forward, we're going to restore from there. What we're doing is we're identifying the percentage of degraded land using the definition that CCD follows, actually, and so trying to use that as the denominator. And so it is a little bit complicated for that particular indicator, but as I said, for the framework, we're trying to use 2020 as a baseline. However, at the national level, you're of course open to use whatever you would like to.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else have a question? No? Well, maybe then we'll bring our webinar to a close. Thank you very, very much, everybody, for your participation from around the world. And thank you very much to Jin for joining us, and for our technical support team for helping us, and for our UNDP colleagues who have organized this really well, and we're very, very grateful for that. I just put in the chat a link to a webpage where you can download the draft guidance that we're developing to support plans for national monitoring systems. It's very much a draft for review, and we welcome your feedback. And there's a feedback form there, and a link in that form where you can access the document. And we would welcome any feedback by the 10th of December, so that then we can produce an improved version. And also you can get in touch with us directly. Our contact details are there on that last slide, for me directly, or as a monitoring support WCMC and Gillian Campbell's address as well. So with that, I'd like to bring this webinar to conclusion with many thanks again for all your participation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you very much. I see a link for feedback, but I don't see a link for draft of guidelines.
The link is in that feedback. So if you open the link, inside there is a link to download the guidance.
Oh, okay, I see. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Good luck.
Thank you, Liz. Bye. Thank you. Who is all right? I can end the meeting now. Thank you, everybody. Sorry for being unprepared at the beginning with the presentation.
Oh, thank you so much, Laura and Philip. Yeah, it takes some practice, I guess, in the beginning, but it's okay. I think it went well, and I'm glad we had questions and participation at the end. So that was super useful.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So we're doing it again later this afternoon.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
And Laura, are you doing it with us this afternoon again?
No, it's Mel this afternoon, and I'm going to advise putting all the slides and video into one slide deck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was disjointed with the sort of 3 separate files, so
Yeah.
I've got a one-to-one with Mel in about an hour, so I'll tell her to put them into one deck, and I'll do the same for tomorrow's and Thursday sessions.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Also, just a quick reminder, I just remembered Cassandra asking me also to emphasize about the survey. Would it be possible for today's session, the next one, to remind participants to kindly fill the survey, because we have very low